Raise your hand if you're a new member.
I'm a new member.
Okay, we have Miss Suzanne LaPierre. Anybody else? New member, new member. I'm on my phone, so I'm strolling. So I have to. Monique, no, Monique, you're not a. Oh, that's funny.
A
That's
new
funny.
lifetime member.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
and then we have put your name in the chat if you're a new member. So we have Imari Salins. We have Monique Norwood, who's a new old member. Who else do we have? Put your name in the chat. New member, new member, new member.
Oh, hi, Kamisha. Kamisha Parker.
Okay.
And Juliet Adams, is that your
New
name?
member, new member. Put your name in the chat. Put your name in the chat. New
Juliet.
members, we have a number of committees that need you. Please don't join. Please do not join just to hang out once a month with us. We have committees that need you. We have our comms committee who does our website, who does our posting on social media, who does our constant contact, who does our press releases, anything you can think of dealing with um AI and digital comms. We have our legal redress. Who else? We have membership. We have membership. Membership has a lot on their plate. They're helping to bring new people in. So, and we have all the chairs of those committees. We have all the chairs of those committees here. If you are interested in any committee, please go to our website. If you're not able to reach the uh, committee chair, I'm stuttering. If you are not able to reach the committee chair tonight, please visit our website and go to meet the team, I believe. And somewhere on there, you will see everyone's email. Please do not hesitate to reach out to the committee chairs for them to give you some additional information. Please reach out directly to the committee chairs for more information. We're going to go ahead and get started.
Well, wait, Monique has her hand up.
Oh, Monique, I told you I'm strolling. Yes, Monique? Monique?
Oh, maybe she just didn't know she had it.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome new members, old members, ex-con members, and all points in between to our I am not doing good tonight. Welcome to our general membership meeting for February. I am Nikki Zimmerman, your servant leader of this illustrious branch. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. Okay, I already called the meeting to order. Meeting to called to order. Okay, I will read our mission statement. The Fairfax County NAACP is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization whose mission is to achieve equity, political rights, and social inclusion by advancing policies and practices that expand human and civil rights, eliminate discrimination, and accelerate the well-being, educational, and economic security of Black people and all people of color. For more information, visit us at www.fairfaxnacp.org. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to have a prayer from Miss Janice.
All right. Unless we start to fight and defeat the enemies in our own country, which are poverty and racism, and make it our talk of equality and opportunities ring true, we are exposed in the eyes of the world as hypocrites as we talk about making people free. And that is from, yes, Shirley Chisholm, because this is still Black History Month, and Women's History Month is next month. So I did Miss Chisholm because it ties in both Black and a woman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, next slide, please. Okay, at this point, I'm gonna go ahead and jump off. I'm at my son's school. He has a performance. And I would love to support him, but I can't be I would love to support you all, but I can't be two places at one time. So I'm gonna hand this over to First VP Evelyn Spain to finish off the meeting. And thank you all for coming again. If you all need me, I could be reached at president@fairfaxnaacp.org for any questions, issues, or concerns. Miss Evelyn, I'll call you tonight when I get home. Y'all take care and have a great evening.
Thank you. Enjoy your concert.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Secretary's report from Mike O'Brien, please.
Yes, good evening, everyone. The secretary doesn't have much of a report tonight. Our minutes are up to date through 2024, and at our upcoming meeting in March, we'll have the minutes for last month, January, and this month, February. So in that case, we're fine. I did want to make one little announcement, and that is, if you're not aware, tonight, starting at 9 o'clock on American Masters program is a profile of our former chief executive of the NAACP, Walter White. And it's amazing that that organization is profiling him. And I would just encourage everybody to watch it. It can be viewed either tonight, or if you have the WETA passport, you can view it anytime. But I'm going to be watching it tonight. And that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretary O'Brien. Next slide. Now we'll have the committee and advocacy reports. And so the first one, I'm going to go in alphabetical order, right? And so my first report is going to come from criminal justice, and that is Pratik. Do you have something you want to share with us tonight?
Yeah, just one quick thing. We've been working on the expungement clinic. We'll be working with OAR on that, and we tentatively have the clinic planned for late spring, early summer. Uh, but yeah, we've made a lot of progress on that and looking forward to it when it comes around.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm on the board of OR, so I know that's a great program, great community uh, uh, advocacy that you're promoting, because you know everybody needs a second chance. So that's excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent. Thank you so
awesome.
much. Mhm. Next on the list is our education report. We have Mr. Marquise Smalls, Miss Tara Smalls' husband. I just know Tara, but now I know you. Mr. Smalls, if you would please share.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I'm just checking in to just let everybody know and remind you that right now is a very urgent time in Fairfax County to pay attention to the budget meetings with the Board of Supervisors, as well as the county budget town halls that they're hosting. So I'm going to drop a couple links into the chat after I finish speaking. One is some of the scheduled budget town halls that are coming up. And then also we have a campaign as we're working with uh, the teachers union to help support to fully fund the new collective bargaining agreement. And the main point I wanted to make about that was that, you know, Fairfax County is in a very interesting position right now because, you know, as the schools continue to be one of the main reasons why people's property values, as well as the area, continues to draw people to want to come live here. If we get into a habit of underfunding our schools, which this most latest budget report seems to be leaning towards, then we're going to really be putting ourselves in a situation where we're not going to be as competitive as even in the surrounding areas of Virginia, but also in, you know, the Maryland and DC areas. And it's really going to create a cycle that is going to dig a hole that's going to be too difficult to get out of as if we continue to let it grow. So please pay attention to the budget town halls, as well as all of the information around the Board of Supervisors coming out for whether or not they are truly going to fully fund the new collective bargaining agreement. It took 47 years for us to get this contract in place, and we really truly need to keep our schools funded, you know, at the proper level so that we can reach all the goals and really educate and raise the bar for our future in Fairfax County. So look out for those links. One will be for an advocacy campaign to show that you're down to fully fund the schools. And then another will be about the town halls with a schedule showing which ones would be in which districts on which dates. And if there's any questions, please reach out to the Education Committee, me, myself, or Sujata, Dr. Hampton. And then anybody who's new who wants to join the Education Committee, we are welcoming all new people to the cause. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Smalls. There are links to the various budget hall meetings right now from Fairfax County. Are you going to be able to post that in the chat so others can know which one is applicable to their particular county or district?
Yep, I'm posting that right now.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Wonderful.
You're welcome.
Next up, we have, excuse me, we have housing. Mary Patton is going to provide a report on housing issues in Fairfax County. Not issues, but concerns.
Hi, folks. Yeah, housing is following the budget very closely also, and we got a quarter of a penny increase on tax valuation, which is quite a far away from what we were promised a couple years ago, which was 2 pennies on tax valuation. So we're going to be asking for more, and I understand the budget's in a tight spot and everybody's in a tight spot. A lot of people be unemployed, property values are going up. People don't want taxes on their property to increase. So the board is going to finally bring up the meals tax as an alternate method of funding. And I think we should support that. We'll have discussions about it, but I think it's something that everybody's doing in Northern Virginia, and we're the only ones that aren't doing it. And I think we should go for, I think 5%, which is more than they've been asking for. It's going to match Alexandria, and Arlington's going to 5%. I mean, where are you going to go to eat where you don't have to pay a meals tax? Only Fairfax County. So we should take advantage of that as a way to raise money for our affordable housing and our schools. And that's going to come up, and it's going to be at all the budget committee meetings. So think about that when you go out to testify. We're also going to have April is Fair Housing Month, and we're kind of losing our fair housing advocacy at the federal level. Fair housing was a function of Housing and Urban Development, and the Housing and Urban Development departments had half its staff laid off, and they're especially wanting to decimate the fair housing piece of it. Fortunately, we have some very, very brave jurisdictions in the Metro DC area who are going to carry on with the fair housing agreements that were made a couple years ago. So we're really happy about that. And we're going to have a speaker come and talk to us about that at our April meeting. So that's amazing. I don't know. I don't think there's many places in the country where the localities are willing to carry on, even if the feds back out. We'll also probably have a workshop coming up later this spring on home ownership, especially Black home ownership, and different programs, policies, pitfalls to that. So keep watching your newsletter and you'll see more about that.
Thank you, Mary. I do know the meals tax came up once before and it was shut down. So I'm glad to see it's being reinitiated, and we're generating energy around this.
It came up as a referendum and the restaurant industry shut it down. They kind of out-campaigned the county. This time the board can make the decision, but they want to have some public support for it. And I think we should give it to them. I think it's easier to stomach, so to speak, a meals tax than
Absolutely
rising tax assessments on your homes. And renters pay the same. You pay a tax assessment too, because your rent goes up when the property owner is charged.
Absolutely. Everybody gets affected. So thank you for sharing that. Moving right along, we're going to seek Diana, do you have a question or concern? Something you'd like to
Uh,
raise?
Yeah, thank you, Evelyn. I don't know. I don't do our bills. My husband does, but he just said this when I walked in the house that the county property taxes have just gone up. Is that the, oh, okay. Because you were saying
I
something
plan
else.
to address that when I make my report, so.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Diana. Next on the list, we have political. Did I already go? Political action. Do we? Oh, no report from political action at this time. All right, if we could move right along. Are there any questions before we move to the next part of our presentation tonight? No? All right. Lenora, can you please advance us to the next slide?
Vice President Spain, are you going to introduce the budget committee, Les, at this
Oh, I
time?
thought they were going to go last. Yes, of course, Les. We definitely want to hear about the budget. Thank you so much. Thank you for the reminder, Miss Lenore. Les,
All
you're on.
right, thank you. So it's interesting. Budget is usually not the topic that most people want to talk, but we've already heard tonight with housing and education, we're in that season. The fiscal year 2026 budget recommendation or proposal was released by the county executive, Brian Hill, last week. The school budget was presented in late January. And I'll give some context here that the total budget for Fairfax County as proposed for the fiscal year 2026 beginning July 1st is $5.7 billion. The school budget represents $4 billion of that total. So you can see the large impact or role that our school budget has, and it's important to really what makes Fairfax County so great. Question that always raises a lot of concern and angst is the issue of tax rate increases. You'll recall that last year we did have a 3-cent increase. This year in the county executive's budget, they are proposing 1.5-cent increase, which when combined with the, those of you who are homeowners have probably received in recent days assessment reports showing the new assessment for your home, which would be used for determining your taxes for this calendar year. Now, the real estate tax base overall or on average increase or the assumptions are 5.3% or an impact of $638 on the average residential property. So that's, again, depending upon what the values of one's home, it could be higher, it could be lower. Because residential real estate now represents such a significant portion of our revenues, that 1-cent increase equates to about $34 million in revenues for the county. Included in this budget is a proposed increase in the transient occupancy tax, which is really a hotel tax, which is increased from 4% to 6%. And that revenue impact is $13 million. That's seen as sort of a tax increase that, again, business travelers, people from outside the community, doesn't hit us on a dollar for dollar basis as much. Now, as it was mentioned earlier, the meals tax is under consideration. The numbers are not in the budget. It will be for discussion on March 18th. What was included in Brian Hill's budget, the county executive's budget, was a 3 or 4 cent implementation for Fairfax County, which would create an opportunity for $48 to $65 million in additional revenues. And this will not be subject to voter approval as it had been in the past and was voted down in the past. So given the current shortfall that we have as regard things like the school budget, this is something that may be have found its day. And the argument for it becoming more popular is meals tax, again, study was done that said only 33% of the revenues don't come from non-Fairfax County residents. So it's not something that's going to be entirely borne by us. So also we'll pick up some additional increased funding from the state of about $23 million. And as probably everyone knows, at least for this year, the casino project or proposal is dead, so it will have no bearing on the 2026 budget. Next slide. So Fairfax County Public Schools requested a county transfer. This is additional monies to help fund their budget request. And that was in the amount of $268 million, which was a 10% increase from fiscal year 2025. The county executive's budget calls for a transfer of $118 million of that total, leaving $149 million shortfall. So currently, as presented, it does present a risk to the collective bargaining agreement, a certified agreement that requires a commitment of $240 million or to fund a 7% increase for employees of the Fairfax County school system. And Marquise talked about earlier the importance of our school systems and really supporting the employees. And I put here, to put it in context, last year there was a major budget agreement to increase the public safety, that's police and fire. Their collective bargaining was agreed last year, first year, and this year, the second year of that increase is going to represent $124 million of the budget. So, you know, we see there, you know, we get to compare the numbers between the two, and of course, there are many more teachers than exist in the public safety headcount. Mary talked about the half-cent increase. So in effect, it 1.5 cents. The commitment, probably going back 9 years, has been to, or the goal has been to have 2 cents committed out of the budget for affordable housing. And so what the increase was, 1/2 cent, which is still short of the goal. It adds about $9 million to housing, but as Mary indicated, I mean, it's very unlikely we're going to reach this goal in by 2034.
It's not 1/2 cent, it's 1/4 cent.
Quarter cent? Quarter cent. Sorry about that. $9 million impact, correct?
No, it's like 4 point something. It's
Well, I think
it's-
we're looking at different numbers. What I saw in the county exec, I thought was 1/2 cent.
not 1/2 cent, it's 1/4.
Okay.
Look again.
Okay, 2% COLA to county employees, and one of the main drivers to trying to bring this budget into balance would be headcount reductions of 208 people in the county employment roles. Next slide, please. So here is the calendar as we stand now. Today, in fact, there was a joint county school budget committee meeting with the Board of Supervisors to discuss the FY 2026 budget tax rate. I have not gotten a report. One of my budget committee members said there was nothing of great note that came out of it. The next meeting is scheduled for March 18th. And this is when we expect some decision to be made on, you know, what tax rate will be used for FY 26 and further discussion about the food and beverage tax. And you see there, they did subsequent calendars all leading up to the public hearings on the budget, April 22nd and 24, where advocates in the community, in NAACP housing, we should all be present, making presentations to advocate for those issues that we are fighting for. Next slide, please. So Marquise put in the chat there the link to the upcoming town halls here. I have it. What I would say is going back to our January 15th advocacy meeting, those items that we're fighting for, of course, in the area of education, having to do with continuing to have the finest schools, is, you know, support for more minority teachers in our school system, more special education teachers, And when I mentioned more Black teachers, I meant to say support the hiring and retention of these Black teachers, and more funding for representation for parents of children with special needs and advocacy cases. That's in the education bucket. In the area of public defender office, since Blacks and people of color tend to be indigent and not always, from an income standpoint, able to afford legal assistance, we're advocating for money for the more money for the public defender's office. For those of you who are familiar with the welfare check that was made on a Miss Sydney Wilson here in Reston in January, where a welfare check ended up in her losing her life, we're advocating for expansion of the co-responder program. Housing, Mary's already talked about. So these are issues where if they're important to you, we want you members and people to attend these town halls to make your voices heard, fighting for the teachers to get what they've fought so hard for over the last 47 years to get to this point. And, it's only through having our voices heard can we, hope to have some success. That's it.
Thank you, Les. Very powerful information that you're sharing with us. I advise all of us, this budget affects everyone who lives in Fairfax County. If you are able to, I definitely implore you to please attend the meetings. If you're not able to attend the meetings, you can go to the fairfaxcounty.gov website and find out how you can submit your questions, or how you can look at the recording of the meetings on Channel 16. But now is the time for us to become even more involved in the budget as it affects us, because it is going to be a tight year. It is a challenging budget. I think the county executive has done a great job, but it's not going to be good enough to sustain the quality of life, the quality of education that we have grown to know here in Fairfax County. So again, please make sure you get involved. Go to the meetings, attend or review the meetings on Channel 16, but it is at fairfaxcounty.gov that all of this information is available to all of us. Thank you so much. Great information being shared tonight. Let me just get on my high horse one time. What I don't see is us being at the forefront. It affects us desperately. You already have the people in Washington, D.C. trying to dismantle the Department of Education, but the county does provide a significant amount of money to our education. And without education, how are we to survive going forward? It affects our children. And if you don't have children, it affects your neighbor's children or your relatives' children. This is important. So please, I cannot stress enough that we are to be active, ask questions, view the recordings, and attend if possible. Thank you so much. Next on our agenda. Yes, finally. Enough of me. We have some special guests tonight, and I would like to turn it over to Dr. Sujatha Hampton, our second VP, to introduce our special guest tonight.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to see you guys here today for this. I'm so happy that you get to be here for this presentation. It's a long time coming, and I'm really, really happy to introduce our speakers. This book, this is what they're going to be talking about, the book that they wrote. I know that they talk about how this came to be and how the branch, like how this actually had something to do with us, how we had something to do with we had something to do with this book coming to our midst. And I hope you guys, after you see this presentation, go get the book. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it at your local bookstore. I got these from our local bookstore here in Reston. And the wonderful speakers, let me introduce them to you guys. We have Chris Barbuschak and Suzanne LaPierre. Chris Barbuschak is a Fairfax County native with a passion for local history. He's an archivist and librarian in Fairfax County Public Library's Virginia room. He gets paid to do what he loves, making Northern Virginia historical records and photographs publicly accessible and assisting researchers with their historical and genealogical quests. A graduate in history from Loyola University Chicago, he received his MLIS from Dominican University. He previously worked for the Chicago Tribune as a photograph archivist and for the Chicago Public Library System. Outside of the library, he can be found road tripping across the country, always in search of the next best vintage diner to experience. And Suzanne LaPierre is a Virginiana specialist librarian for Fairfax County Public Libraries, a columnist for Public Libraries Magazine and Computers in Libraries. Her writing has also been published in Public Library Quarterly and the Library and Book Trade Almanac. She holds an MLIS from University of South Carolina, an MA from the George Washington University, and a BFA from Rhode Island School of Design. The Washington Post quoted her takeaway from the research for this book: "Progress doesn't happen just because time passes. Progress happens when people take action to make things better." Suzanne was born in Washington, D.C. and currently resides in Northern Virginia. I am really, really excited for you to hear about this. It's the story of the desegregation of our libraries, and it all came about from a simple question that I asked in a meeting as a trustee of the Fairfax County Library Board. And I had no idea when I asked this question that this was going to happen. And I just can't wait for you guys to hear this presentation and then for you guys to read this book. Chris and Suzanne, I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
All right. Well, thanks, Sujatha. Let's get the PowerPoint up and running here. Miss Lenore's working on that.
You good, Lenore? Here we go.
All right, there we go. Well, good evening, everyone. Suzanne and I are really excited to be here to talk to you about desegregating public libraries in Northern Virginia, and we could just jump right in. Let's go to the next slide there. So this would not have been possible without Sujatha. So in April 2021, recently appointed to the Fairfax County Public Library Board, at a retreat, she posed the question, were Fairfax County public libraries ever segregated? And if they weren't, how is it possible that the school systems were segregated and the libraries weren't? And nobody really knew. So this question was forwarded to our library director at the time, Jessica Hudson, who's pictured there on the bottom left. And she sent the email in the top right to us in the Virginia room. And for those of you who haven't been to the Virginia room, come out and see us. We're on the second floor of the City of Fairfax Regional Library. We're the Special Collections Local History and Genealogy branch for the library system. So we collect Fairfax County photographs, documents, archival collections, all kinds of cool stuff, and make it accessible to the public. So Jessica sent this email to us asking, were FCPL libraries ever segregated? She asked Suzanne and I to look into this and also take a look at what was going on at the surrounding Northern Virginia public libraries like Arlington and Loudoun. And she asked that we compile some research and get back to her and present at a future library board meeting. So next slide. So how do we go about doing this? Well, in the Virginia room, we have a lot of the old library records for Fairfax. We've got meeting minutes that go back to the 1930s. We've got bookmobile records, correspondence, photographs, all kinds of stuff like that. So we kind of mined those records to see what we could find to answer this question. And then we also reached out to surrounding Northern Virginia public library equivalents like the Virginia Room, like Arlington has a Center for Local History at their library, and Alexandria has a local history room. And we asked and we investigated what kind of records they had to help investigate whether their libraries were segregated. At one point, they desegregated. From there, we made a field trip down to Richmond to the Library of Virginia. They have a lot of library records for the whole state down there. We did oral history interviews with a lot of community members, people who couldn't use the library because of their race, longtime employees of Fairfax County Public Library System in Arlington and Alexandria. And then we made some field trips. That's Suzanne down there. We visited various formerly segregated public libraries like Percival Library and Loudoun. And after several months, this kind of became a labor of love for us because we kept just finding more and more information where we had to force ourselves to stop. And we wrote a 100-page report and we presented it to the library board in September 2021. After which everyone said, you got to write a book. So we wrote a book, and that was published last January or February. I've lost track, but all the proceeds from it, Suzanne and I think, make $1 in royalties. All have been going to the Fairfax County NAACP because a lot of its members are actually largely responsible for making sure that these libraries were desegregated and made accessible to everyone. So next slide. A little bit of background. We're going to talk about just real briefly each county in Northern Virginia, what was going on. Real briefly, Fairfax County, before FCPL was established in 1939, there were several pre-existing libraries in the county. These were all volunteer run. They were all privately run. The oldest was the Fortnightly Library in Herndon, which was established in the 1880s. Great Falls had a library, Vienna, McLean. There was even a Fairfax County Library that actually wasn't a county library. It was a private library. But every single one of these libraries were all segregated. If you were Black and living in the county, you couldn't access any of the resources in the library. Next slide. Fairfax County Public Library arrived on the scene in 1939. And this was the original building. It was this small 24 by 24 cinder block building located behind the Fairfax County Courthouse. The public could not actually access this building. The book collection was on the left side there in what you see in the picture there, and that's where the library offices were. And on the right, you see there's like a little garage there. There is a 1939 Chevrolet panel truck that could hold about 6,000 books, and it traveled throughout the county, going to schools and general stores and private homes and the pre-existing county libraries like Falls Church, Vienna, and McLean. It would go there and drop off books, and that's how you got your library books. Next slide. So these are little snippets from the Library Board of Trustees minutes from the very beginning in 1939. And there is a question from the very beginning: would the Black residents of Fairfax County be served? And in September 1939, they said, yes, but the book collection is going to be segregated. Books allocated for white readers can't be checked out by Black readers, and books allocated for Black readers can't be checked out by white readers. And a year later, finally, when the county got the bookmobile and it started actually traveling around in July 1940, the question came up again: are we going to offer service to the Black residents of the county? And the library system said yes. And again, in December 1940, they also said that, and that there'd be a specific book collection just for them. Now, if you go to the next slide, we have a surviving circulation record from 1941. We have actually a whole series of these from the early 1940s. You could see they were segregated. They divided it into white and Black for statistics. And on the left there, you could see how much better served the white community was. You could see they could get books at any of the white school libraries, any of the community library branches like Falls Church and McLean and Vienna. You could get them from deposit stations, which were essentially like little boxes that were kind of like what you see today, a little free library around in the various neighborhoods. There were little boxes where they would deposit, the bookmobile would deposit books. And then you could actually also get on the bookmobile and check out books. Now, for the Black residents, the only way you could access FCPL library books was in 2 bookmobile deposit stations. That was it. There was one in Fairfax, there was one in Falls Church, and nowhere else. We don't know exactly where in Fairfax and Falls Church those 2 deposit stations were, but that was it. And you could see how abysmal, you could see by the statistics there, how badly served the Black community was. Next slide. In 1953, the FCPL was in really bad shape. The book collection was horrible. Branch service was just terrible. And the library board hired a new library director named Mary McCullough. And 2 weeks on the job, she closed the library system down for 6 months, completely reorganized everything. And when it reopened in 1954, that's when FCPL desegregated. And the very first branch, which was the Thomas Jefferson branch, which still exists today, you can see a little snippet there, was free of charge to all residents of the area. Everyone could actually attend it and check out books there. Today, that location is a dentist. It's in the Graham Road Shopping Center, and this shopping center is actually about to be torn down in the next year for a health complex over there. But that is when FCPL desegregated in 1954. Next slide. So that was FCPL, but in Vienna, that was a little bit of a different case. So Vienna had a pre-existing community library called the Vienna Town Library that was established in the 1890s. And in its town library charter, it explicitly stated that it would only serve the white inhabitants of the area. Now on the left there is William McKinley Carter. He was a lifelong resident of Vienna. He was a charter member of the Fairfax County NAACP. He worked for the IRS for 50 years, and when he retired in the mid-1950s, a shocking incident occurred between his family and the Vienna Town Library. A white woman who was working in the library, who wasn't aware of the town library segregationist policies, checked out books to Carter's children, and they were able to take them home with them and read them. And once the Vienna Town Library found out about this, the library board went to his house and demanded them back. This was much to the outrage of Carter and his friends and other community members in Vienna, and they got together and formed the Friends of the Vienna Library with the intent of hoping to desegregate the Vienna Town Library. Next slide. It quickly became apparent that the library wasn't going to change their ways, so they courted Fairfax County Public Library to come out to Vienna and open a branch there. So after about 1.5 years of efforts, doing a lot of fundraising support from the Vienna community, they raised about $7,000. And this is a picture of the Friends of the Vienna Library. That's Carter there in the back. This is the lease signing of what became the storefront Patrick Henry Library. And they successfully were able to bring a public library accessible to everyone to Vienna. Next slide. The Vienna Town Library eventually closed. It never really changed its ways. Today, it's actually a little museum. You could go see it. It still exists in the Vienna town, in the town of Vienna. This is William Carter in 1968. The Friends dedicated an honorary bookshelf in his name. All new books that came in at the Patrick Henry Storefront Library were put on this shelf. Next slide. He was instrumental in opening the permanent Patrick Henry Library, which still exists today in 1971. You can see him there. That's in the middle there at the grand opening. And next slide. Today, the Patrick Henry Library is actually about to be torn down. It's going to be closed for renovation in the next several months. And it's actually going to be renamed the Carter Library in recognition of the Carter family and desegregating the library. I forget what the target date is for when that's reopening, but really, really glad that these civil rights activists are finally going to get some recognition for what they did. Today, if you actually go into the Patrick Henry Library, there's this nice oil painting of both the Carters in the meeting room there. Moving on to the next slide, Falls Church. So Falls Church, as I mentioned, had a pre-existing community library. It was established in 1899 in the back of the mayor of Falls Church's house in a garage, and it also was segregated from the beginning until 1955. These two men here, both heavily involved with the Fairfax County NAACP, were responsible for desegregating it. Reverend Wallace Costner was longtime pastor of the Second Baptist Church in Falls Church, and also was largely responsible for getting Luther Jackson High School to open up in Falls Church. It was as most of you know, it's probably was the only high school for Black high school students in Fairfax County. And on the right, I don't think this man needs any introduction, but Dr. E.B. Henderson, also known as the grandfather of Black basketball, also a Falls Church resident, and practically the founder of the current existing Fairfax County NAACP chapter. The two of them put pressure on the Falls Church Library Board to desegregate, and this little snippet from the September 1955 Library Board minutes over in Falls Church, which is now called the Mary Riley Stiles Library. The library board asked that Mrs. Elizabeth Graham, who was the librarian there, to meet with Reverend Costner and E.B. Henderson and talk about providing service to the Black residents of the county. So they had a very productive meeting. E.B. even brought some historical Falls Church Black history materials to contribute to the library, and the library desegregated shortly after this because of both of their efforts. In the next slide, just a little bit of recognition. EB has gotten a lot of recognition in the last couple of years. A statue was dedicated on his alma mater at the University of District of Columbia just 2 years ago. There's a historical marker in front of his house that was put up a couple of years ago, and his grandson, E.B. Henderson II, just published this amazing book last year. So he's getting a lot of recognition, well-deserved, over these last couple of years. Reverend Costner really hasn't. However, Costner Drive, where Second Baptist Church is today, is named after him. And we hope this book actually put him back in the spotlight, because he did so much for civil rights in not just Fairfax County, but the whole Northern Virginia region. Next slide, just real quick before turning it over to Suzanne. Prince William County has the distinction of being the only public library system in Northern Virginia to be desegregated from the very beginning. In 1952, it was the first state demonstration library. And what does that mean? Well, the state chose Prince William County to be this demonstration library where they would fund all the books. They would fund a bookmobile. They would fund the collection in the library building and the shelving and furniture. They would run it as a pilot program for a year. And then after a year, they turned it over to the county and the board of supervisors to run it. So because of that, and because of some language in the Virginia Code at the time, which Suzanne will talk a little bit more about, it had to be open to everyone. So it was open to everyone. This is actually a really great photo on the right of, it was a segregated school in Prince William County that the bookmobile stopped at that school, and this is the children using it. So over to Suzanne to talk about some of the other counties. You can go to the next slide, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Suzanne LaPierre. I'm also a librarian in the Virginia room of the Fairfax County Public Library and the co-author of this book. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our other neighboring counties in Northern Virginia, as well as a brief look at Washington, D.C. and other parts of Virginia for context. So over in the city of Alexandria, we have Samuel Wilbert Tucker, who you see in the center there. He was a young attorney at the time of these events who had been born and raised in the city of Alexandria. And Mr. Tucker was only in his 20s at this time. He had set up his law office in Alexandria, and he was only living 2 blocks away from this beautiful new library that opened in 1937, the Alexandria Public Library. But he was unable to use this library because of his race. So he decided to sue for access to the library. But while his legal case was being slow walked through the system, he decided to also plan a protest that is sometimes referred to as the first sit-in of the civil rights movement. In 1939, Mr. Tucker recruited these young men who you see on the left to enter the library one at a time and request to open a library account, whereupon, being denied because of their race, they would then take a book off the shelf and sit quietly at one of the tables reading. Well, for this simple act, the police were called and the young men declined to leave. So they were arrested, which Mr. Tucker had anticipated, and he had called the press to come and take these photographs of the young men being arrested and escorted out of the library. He wanted to call attention to the injustice of Black residents being not allowed to use this library. Unfortunately, the actions of Mr. Tucker did not result in the library being desegregated. Instead, the city of Alexandria hastily built a separate but unequal library for Black citizens called the Robinson Library, which you'll see in the next slide. It opened less than a year later in 1940. And you see one of the librarians standing in front of the Robinson Library there. You can see how tiny it is. Definitely not the amount of space or the amount of books that the library for white citizens held. Nevertheless, it was very enthusiastically utilized by the community. You might ask, when did the Alexandria library system finally integrate? Well, it wasn't until 1959 that adults of all races had access to the main library. And it wasn't until 1962 that the children's services were also folded into the main library. So it was really 1962 when the library system was fully integrated. So now in the next slide, we'll take a look at Arlington and compare. There was a very different situation in Arlington. In Arlington, it was very similar to what Chris was talking about with Fairfax, where there were several pre-existing libraries that had been founded as early as the 1800s by wealthy individuals or women's groups operating out of church basements. However, these were all implicitly or explicitly segregated. And when the Arlington Public Library became part of the government, a government department in 1937, they partnered with all of these pre-existing libraries. So the Black residents of Arlington founded their own library association in 1940 called the Holmes Library Association, named after this gentleman whose portrait you see here, Henry Louis Holmes, who was Arlington's Commissioner of Revenue from 1877 to 1904, and his picture hung in the library, which I'll talk about in a minute. In 1944, the Arlington Public Library partnered with the Holmes Library Association to have a library for Black residents in the Carver Homes community, which was a community for folks who had been displaced when the Pentagon was built. And that portrait of Mr. Holmes hung in that library, which you'll see in the next slide. So you can see the little public library there. That was the Holmes Library that opened in 1944. And I have to apologize for a typo in this PowerPoint slide. It's Carver Homes, not Carter Homes. So unfortunately, after just 5 years, the land that the library existed on was to be sold. So the library had to be torn down, and Arlington Public Library did not find another place for that branch. So they just quietly integrated in 1950. Now, we believe that they integrated in 1950 because they were aware that since 1946, the state of Virginia had a law that all libraries that were receiving state aid or state funding must be serving all residents. So because the Holmes branch was closed down, the Arlington Public Library had to quietly integrate, but we don't have any evidence that they actually made this change known to the Black community, let alone welcome the Black community to use these formerly segregated branches. So in the next slide, I just wanted to look at the difference between Arlington and Alexandria. So why is it that Arlington Public Libraries desegregated in 1950 and Alexandria not until 1962? Well, we believe that the presence of segregated facilities actually allowed these jurisdictions to forestall full integration of libraries, because that 1946 law was vague in its wording. It said must be providing services to all residents, but services could be maybe a bookmobile stop or a separate segregated library. It didn't really specify that these had to be equal services and out of the same facilities. So the presence of a separate segregated library often enabled a jurisdiction to forestall full integration. And in the next slide, we're going to go over to Loudoun County. This lovely family is the Murray family, Samuel Cardoza Murray, his wife Josephine Cook Murray, and their son Keith. This is a photo from 1950 that we found in the Thomas Balch Library archives. And these folks owned an upholstery shop in Percival that was very well regarded, and so they received commissions from some very notable individuals. In 1956, they received a request from the sister-in-law of President Eisenhower, Mrs. Mike Moore, who lived nearby in Hillsborough, requested that they would make some Austrian-style draperies for her home. And the Murrays weren't familiar with Austrian-style draperies exactly, so they went to the public library, the Percival Public Library, And this was the only public library in Loudoun County at the time. When they tried to check out a book from the Percival Public Library, they were denied access due to their race. So the Murrays decided to sue the library for access. Mr. Murray said, I pay taxes and my taxes support the library, and therefore I should be able to check out a book from this library. There was a lot of pushback from segregationists in the area, calling themselves defenders of state sovereignty and individual liberty, trying to keep the library segregated, even though that law was in place, saying that they must be serving all residents, and there was no bookmobile stop. There was no separate library for non-white people. So they were clearly in violation of that law, and thus they were compelled to integrate in 1957. And that was the first legal victory for the civil rights movement in Loudoun County. Well, after all that, you'll see in the next slide, the Murrays were then free to finish their decorating work for Mrs. Moore, and the Eisenhowers came over to visit the Moore family, and they were so impressed with those fashionable Austrian-style draperies in the Moore's home that they requested that the Murrays make similar draperies for their home in Gettysburg. So if you go to the Eisenhower Historic Site in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, you'll see these Austrian-style draperies in nearly every room of the house that we believe were made by the Murrays. And the Percival Library is still there, still part of the Loudoun County Public Library System. So next slide, we have, I just wanted to talk briefly about Washington, D.C., because Washington, D.C. was a critical resource for Black scholars living in Northern Virginia during this time period. The Library of Congress and the D.C. Public Library were never segregated, so folks who had the means to travel into D.C. could utilize those libraries, and that is what people like Samuel Tucker did in order to study for his bar exam. Also, of course, there was Howard University in Washington, D.C., and that's where Mr. Tucker and another library activist who I'll talk about in the next slide received their law degrees from Howard. And I can only imagine that living in a more progressive environment made them all the more determined when they went back to their home cities to initiate more equitable services in their hometowns. So in the next slide, we'll see another man who did that. Another attorney by the name of W. Hale Thompson, who was also a Howard Law School graduate, went back to his hometown of Newport News, Virginia, to set up his law practice, and he initiated the desegregation of the libraries in Newport News, beginning with establishing a separate branch for Black residents in 1949, and eventually desegregating the main library in 1952. And if you go to Newport News today, you can see the likeness of Mr. Thompson by artist Asa Jackson on the side of his former law office, which is now a barber shop. So I'm just going to briefly touch on some other parts of Virginia. It being Black History Month, we can give a brief shout out to some of these other folks. So over in Portsmouth, we have two dentists, Dr. Hugo Owens and Dr. James Hawley were dentists who fought to integrate the Portsmouth Public Library system. And they did succeed in 1960. And again, I'm skipping over the long battle with segregationists that occurred in order for this to happen, but they were successful in 1960 in legally compelling the libraries to integrate. But it wasn't until 1963 that the segregated libraries both moved into this building that you see on the lower right, which was an old post office building. And shout out to Bertha Edwards up here on the upper left. She was a librarian who ran the Colored Community Library from 1945 to 1963. That was another library that was established by the Black community to serve the Black community during segregation. And she was the librarian there for the entire time. And then when the libraries integrated, she moved into the Portsmouth Public Library and became a librarian there. And the current director of the Portsmouth Public Library, Todd Elliott, he worked in the library when he was young as a page, and he actually knew Bertha Edwards. So he's currently the first Black director of the Portsmouth Public Library. So kind of a neat continuation there. And also the dentist, Dr. Hawley, later became the first Black mayor of Portsmouth. So interesting situation there. You can still visit the Portsmouth Public Library, and the formerly known as the Colored Community Library is now a Black History Museum there. So on the next slide, we'll just take a look at what was going on over in Danville. If you know anything about Danville, you might have heard it called the last capital of the Confederacy. And that is because of events that took place in this fancy building on the right, the Sutherland Mansion, which was built in 1857. Jefferson Davis held his last cabinet meeting of the Confederacy there in 1865. And in 1928, it became a public library for white people only. So in 1960, led by some teenagers and students in the area, there was a series of protests and a lawsuit to desegregate this library. And they were successful in 1960 in forcing it legally to open as an integrated facility. They had actually closed the library for a while to try to prevent this from happening, but they were legally compelled to open as an integrated facility. And when they did open, they had removed all of the tables and chairs from the library so that people of different races could not be seated together in the library. And they had instituted a 4-page long library application asking all kinds of nosy questions like, when do you expect to use the library? What is your level of education? Why do you want to use the library? And requiring 2 references and also a fee to use the library. So definitely an example of implicit segregation, of making people feel uncomfortable using that library, even though it was technically desegregated. So in the next slide, okay, this the last little example I want to give, not little, but an example I want to give that ties the library desegregation into the wider civil rights movement at the time. Reverend Wyatt T. Walker was one of the faith leaders in Petersburg, Virginia, who worked with local high school and college students to desegregate the library there. And you'll see over on the left, the steps of the courthouse there. Those folks are having a silent vigil for Mr. Reverend Walker and a few other folks who were held overnight in jail for refusing to leave the library. So Mr. Reverend Walker's activism resulted not only in the library being desegregated in 1960, but also other public institutions following suit in Petersburg. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was so impressed with Reverend Walker that he asked Reverend Walker to be his chief of staff. So as you can see on the Jet magazine cover, he was often referred to as the man behind Martin Luther King Jr. And he planned many of the famous King events that we're familiar with today. So I also want to talk about his wife, Teresa Ann Walker, because she was also a participant in the sit-in, the library sit-in, and she was a freedom rider, and she still lives in Virginia today. But we'll see her picture in the next slide, or the next slide after this one. But this one, we just want to talk briefly about what were library associations doing at this time. Well, unfortunately, the library associations were disappointingly passive. The Virginia Library Association engaged in some sort of both sidesism. Here they are in 1955 advertising the Virginia Library Association's upcoming conference. And they're showing that they're featuring Mr. Souders Redding as a dinner speaker. He was the first Black professor at an Ivy League university. But right underneath it says that you can make reservations at the Jefferson Hotel unless you're Black, in which case you have to make a reservation, you have to contact someone to get accommodations at Virginia Union University, because that hotel was segregated. So sort of mixed messages going on here. Also that's the Virginia Library Association. The American Library Association in 1939 came out with their Library Bill of Rights just a few months before Samuel Tucker had that sit-in in Alexandria that we were talking about earlier. And yet nobody from the American Library Association came to Mr. Tucker's defense when he was trying to desegregate the library. It wasn't until 1961 that the ALA added non-discrimination based on race to the Library Bill of Rights. And 1961 is a little bit after most of these events that we've just talked about. So it was a little bit too little too late from the library associations. So in conclusion, in this final slide, I mentioned that I wanted to show Teresa Ann Walker and Evans Hopkins, because I want, especially when we talk to perhaps younger audiences, I want people to know that many of these folks that were involved in these events still live in Virginia today. This is not ancient history. Mrs. Walker has recently been interviewed by the Washington Post for her work as a freedom rider. She was also in the library at the time of the sit-in. She was in the children's area with her own children and the children of another protester. And when she was told that she could be arrested, she said, "I have come prepared," basically called their bluff. The police realized that, oh, we're going to be stuck with all these children if we arrest her. So they just left her there with the kids. So, and Evans Hopkins wrote about how when he was a child, he was so excited to go to that fancy library in Danville because he wanted to see what was in the big library. And when he walked in there, he noticed that there was no furniture in there. And even as a child, he realized that, something was wrong here and felt unwelcome in that library. So this is very much not ancient history. And there's so much more to this story. This is just the tip of the iceberg that we've talked about today. There's a lot more in the book. We do hope that you will check out the book. It's in the libraries if you'd like to check it out. There's over 100 photos in the book, many of which have never been published before. Much of the research has never been published before because it was derived from local archives. And we also have in the book a lot of current landmarks that you can visit if you want to see some of these libraries that are still operating as libraries. Some of these libraries are currently Black History museums or other kinds of museums. And we go in a little bit more into the implicit versus explicit segregation issue and the relationship between public libraries and school libraries. So we are very honored that you had us here today to talk about this important topic. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for just giving us this little taste of this book. I do promise you that if you get this book and read this book, it's a riveting read. You wouldn't expect that something about the desegregation of the libraries would be such a page turner, but it really is. And the fact that they have so many wonderful primary documents in here that explain the questions that like the question that I asked really was, were the libraries segregated because the schools were segregated, and this is Virginia, so it didn't seem likely that they weren't. And actually the answer that Jessica gave at that time was, she said, I don't think that they were. I don't think that they were ever segregated. She just didn't think they were segregated. It seems so bizarre because our libraries are such welcoming places now, maybe, I don't know. And in fact, it's such a story of how the work that went into doing this. And in fact, there's even a little thing in here that shows the actual answer to the primary question of why would the schools have been segregated and the libraries not have been segregated. Our superintendent of schools, who, what's his name? Woodson, whatever his name is, Woodson, not Carter G, the other Woodson, the Woodson that was a supervisor, the Woodson, he was on the library board. And he said, and he was a superintendent of schools too, and he said that the rationale for desegregating libraries, but keeping schools segregated, was that in libraries, it would just be the races would just be passing one another. They would not be congregating. They would not be working together. They wouldn't be talking together. They would just going in, getting their books, checking them out and leaving. So the chance of the dangers of the mixing would be far less in libraries than they would be in schools, which is in this book, like the documentation from the notes and from the minutes of meetings. It's just a fascinating read, and I do hope that you will do that. If there are any questions, we have a couple minutes for questions before we move on. Mike.
Yes, hi. I just want to re-emphasize the fact that both Chris and Suzanne, all of the royalties from this book are going to our chapter. And that is just an amazing, amazing, generously provided gift to us. And I want all of us to just honor that and compliment them for that. And for the first year, I was the one who received the first donation. I was like, what? I offered them each a membership in the branch. So they are both members as well.
Lovely. Lovely. Les.
Yes, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I have a special place in my heart for librarians. My mother was a librarian and professor at Fisk University, HBCU in Nashville. And I know this is a thin thread to what you talked about, but back in 1977, she and Dr. E.J. Josie compiled and edited one of the first reference books on African Americans in the field of librarianship. And they cover the early history of librarians, starting back in the 1800s, early library associations, special collections, and oral history programs. So out of print now, but I still have it on my shelf. So
That's very cool.
thank you. I really appreciate what I learned tonight.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I wish we had a copy in the Virginia
I
room.
know. I was thinking the same thing. I mean, I know it's Tennessee stuff, but it would be pretty cool.
No, this is national.
Oh,
This is national. In fact, it even covers the early history of Hampton Institute and
Oh, you said national. I thought you said Nashville.
no, Fisk University's in Nashville.
University, I thought it was, that's why I thought it, but that's probably why I heard national.
Right, I'm sorry. No, this covers,
what is the title again?
Handbook of Black Librarianship.
Oh, okay. We'll have to check that out and see if we
It
can
was
get a
printed
copy.
by Libraries United, which I think now might be Bloomsbury or something.
Oh,
That's very cool.
wow. That's awesome.
I've got a question.
Oh, Evelyn first, then Jesse. You're muted, Evelyn.
I'd like to tell you, I'd like to say what a powerful presentation you provided to us today. And to see where we have come from. We all knew about Jim Crow, we all knew about segregation, but see us move forward, to know that Edward Henderson was instrumental in integration of the library in Falls Church. One of our very own members, Marvin Powell, his wife is now in leadership at the Library of Congress. So thank you for informing us of where we've come to where we are, to how we got here today. This is powerful information. We should not take things for granted. All of the suffering, all of the challenges, all the courage that those people, those who came before us, to make sure that we were able to integrate and have access to the books of the library, that we, like they said, we all pay taxes for the library, so we should have access to it. Thank you so much for sharing this information tonight.
Truly, really wonderful. And just the thought that because there is something separate and unequal, you've ticked that box, and so you really don't have to integrate because that box is ticked. Jesse.
Sure, yes, thank you very much. I loved how you went around different parts of Virginia. So that was fascinating, especially areas like Danville and Fort Smith, et cetera. I'm curious when it comes to the rest of the nation or the rest of the South or regionally, if there are any larger context, anything different about Virginia, Northern Virginia than the rest of, the country, the South, the North, any comments there, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Well, that's a really good question. Do you have anything to say about that, Chris?
Yeah, go ahead. Take it away, Suzanne.
Oh, I was just going to grab this book that I have over here.
Oh my gosh, Suzanne is sitting in the library. I didn't
Oh
notice
gosh,
that until you moved away from your desk.
Yeah, we're at the library tonight. We're up until 9 p.m. Unfortunately, I think I took that book home, but there's a great book about the desegregation of libraries in the South on a more broad a level that touches upon other cases in other Southern states. And it's by Wayne Weigard, I believe. Actually, I have another one of his books here. Oh yeah. All right, this is another book that he wrote about just the public library in general. I think he might touch upon the desegregation in here, but he has another book, Wayne Weigand, on the desegregation of libraries throughout the South. So that's a good sort. Basically, a lot of the Southern states, I think, were pretty similar. It typically was like about 1960-ish when there was like the huge, the civil rights movement, led to a more widespread push to desegregate these libraries that were still segregated. Yeah, I don't know. Was there anything really special about Virginia? I mean, again, the proximity to Washington D.C. I feel like um, maybe inspired some of the activists in the Northern Virginia area, with the Library of Congress and the D.C. Public Library being open to everyone. That certainly created a contrast between DC and Northern Virginia. Like Samuel Tucker went to school in DC because his parents sent him to Armstrong School in DC because the Northern Virginia schools were still segregated, or in some cases there was no high school for Black students at all back then in the 30s. So he would travel back and forth on a streetcar between DC and Alexandria. And as soon as you crossed over into Alexandria, then you had to, sit in the back of the streetcar or whatever. So it was just this huge contrast that struck him as a huge injustice. And I mean, I feel like that inspired him to be an activist at a very young age. He was actually involved in a lawsuit when he was a teenager for refusing to give up his seat on the streetcar. And then the events that I talked about in Alexandria, he was only in his early 20s at that time when all of that happened.
It can't have been easy anywhere, I can't imagine, in the South. I can't, or anywhere maybe, but certainly in the South. Mike.
This is a shameless plug, but I've been working on a book about the very first sit-in in the state of Mississippi. It occurred in 1961 at the Jackson City Public Library.
Oh,
And those students took their guidance from those types of things that were happening all around. I believe the 1939 Alexandria sit-in was the very first type of demonstration at a library. So Virginia holds that, designation. But Chris and Suzanne have been great help to me as I've gone and done research, and you can request microfilm from all over the country from any publication that is microfilmed. It will come to the Virginia room and you can look at it, and they've both been so helpful in my work, but it does relate to libraries.
We're just so lucky. I think people don't even realize how lucky we are. Our libraries are so great. Our library staff is so great. Chris and Suzanne are so great. Just for such a resource to us. This book, I can't recommend it. I can't recommend it highly enough. Oh, the disters have their hand up. I don't see it. I'm sorry. It didn't come to the front. I don't see. Oh, hi,
Just a quick question from the peanut gallery here. So that, the really just wonderful, excellent presentation pointed to the the leadership and the involvement of lawyers, ministers, merchants, medical professionals. Were, in terms of civil society and civic associations, were there any important supportive or powerful, important voices from business groups or associations of lawyers, associations of Black lawyers, associations of Black teachers, other teachers, any organized civic association support for desegregating libraries?
I'll let Chris take that one because I know he has some answers for that.
The only one that comes to mind is Vienna. When there was the push to open up the Patrick Henry Library, there were multiple businesses, realtors, just the whole community really got behind with raising this money to essentially open a library that was open to everyone in Vienna. There was one place called the Roland Road restaurant in Vienna. It was owned by a Greek owner, and anytime you bought a coffee or something, you'd put a quarter or something in this cup, and he raised a ton of money just to help support this effort. So that's the only one that comes to mind. I can't think of any other Fairfax County civic associations that got behind the effort, or necessarily in Arlington or Alexandria. Can you think of any others, Suzanne?
Well, in Loudoun, the Quaker groups were very supportive of desegregation efforts, and I believe they tried to help fund the Murray's lawsuit, but the Murray's attorney had advised them that if they received any outside funding, it was going to look like they were a political prop or something like that. So they decided to use their own money to fight this lawsuit so that it would be clear that they were not being used as a front for other political groups or whatever. So there were people there were groups who were sympathetic, who did try to help some of these activists in some situations.
Thanks.
Diana.
Thanks. Quickly, I just wanted to say I grew up in Vienna for so many years, and I had no idea of this history on the library. I went to the Patrick Henry Library all the time. I know they're changing name now, and that's great. I've always been a civil rights advocate, even as a teenager, but I grew up there not knowing this history. So thank you so much for sharing that. It's very, very fascinating and vital to know. It's just right in my backyard. There's so much I just didn't even know. Thank you.
Yeah, that whole Carter story was just not well known. And like in 1989, when FCPL celebrated, I think it was their 50th anniversary, there's a whole section on Patrick Henry Library, and none of that history is even mentioned, just completely whitewashed. So that's why it's just so fantastic now that the Carters are finally getting their due. The recognition is finally in place. It's really great.
I think that is part of like that's part of the thing about the like even wondering a question like that, and then seeking to ask it. That's really the thing. It's very easy for us to believe that the freedoms we have, we've always had, and that everybody has always had the freedoms that we think they have. Even now, we're sitting here, and there's so many people who don't have the freedoms that everyone on this call may have. And it's easy to think that, and without asking these questions and actually diving into the history, you would never know. And then some people will read the book and know, and most people won't read. You know what I mean? It's just that's the way it is, because it's so much easier for us to believe that that the circumstances in which we live are the circumstances in which everyone lives, and that everyone has and always has. I also grew up in Vienna, and I always knew that Vienna I mean, I got here in 1972, so it probably hadn't been, I don't remember the date now that you said that Vienna was when they desegregated, when they built, I don't remember. But, that feeling that Vienna was a separate kind of a place, that people stayed in their lanes, was definitely there. I felt it when I, growing up there, but at that time. But to realize the lengths to which people went, going to these people's houses to try to retrieve books that children were reading, is so mean-spirited and cruel and horrible, and lets you know that, just people need to make sure everybody stays in their lane and does not get out of their lane, So this shining light on this story has been just wonderful. It's a really great read. I highly recommend it. Actually, it's a riveting read, even if you're not somebody who usually reads history. So anyway, I know we're not supposed to go past 8:30.
Yes,
I see Evelyn's smiling face here.
Yes, thank you. It was a powerful presentation, and there's so much to know. I hope that everyone gets an opportunity to go out and perhaps go to the library, check it out. More importantly, purchase the book so the proceeds can come to Fairfax County NAACP.
I have purchased so many of them and given them away as gifts because they're a wonderful gift. It's such a totally original gift. I see that. I think that's Lenore's hand up. I don't know whether that's about the presentation or.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lenore, we have 2 minutes, and then we're gonna I have one more announcement that we need to make, and then we're gonna release everyone to.
I would be finished. It's in the chat. I was just asking where the best place to purchase the book is.
I got mine from Scroll Books, but I think I also got a shipment of them, a bundle of them from Amazon.
It's practically every.
Not a shipment. I got some books because I gave them away. I gave a lot of books away, so I got some from Amazon because they didn't have enough at Scroll. That's the independent bookstore here. So I don't know whether Chris and Suzanne have.
It's practically everywhere. Amazon. You can go to any of the local Barnes and Noble. They're there, and we even have copies here in the Virginia room. If you want to come out and visit us, shameless
We
plug
want
for
to
you guys to come
promote
out.
Barnes and Noble, not Amazon. Barnes and Noble, please.
Well, which library are you located, Chris? I'm sorry.
Fairfax City, right
Fairfax
downtown.
City. Okay.
That's where I got my copy directly from Chris. He signed it for me.
Oh,
all right.
awesome.
You bring mine around and have you guys.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. I just wanted to, I see that I wanted to make one more announcement, and there's a Juliet Adams are you able to tell everybody about the event for Shirley Chisholm that's going to be held next month for Women's History? Juliet Adams. Okay. I just wanted to share that in addition to is she on? No. In addition to the event that we're going to hold in Occoquan, I'll put what I'll do is I'll send the communication to Chair Michelle, and perhaps she can share it online with everyone. Oh, Juliet.
Okay, all right. Are you hearing me
You
now?
have 1 minute, Julia, and then we
Yes.
must let everyone
Very
go.
quickly. It's a celebration for Shirley Chisholm. It was an act. It is an act which was signed into law, the Shirley Chisholm Congressional Gold Medal Act, in December. And so you're going to get information about it. It's going to be at the Rayburn Building. There's a cost because it's a dinner honoring her and white allies on March the 28th. It's a Friday from 5 to 8 p.m. More information to follow. And I look forward to seeing everyone here because everything you spoke about, Shirley Chisholm embraced because she knew there was a time would come like this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your brevity too. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's been an amazing informational sharing of the desegregation of the libraries. Please, please attend any of the meetings that are in your district regarding the budget, the upcoming budget concerns. Mr. Smalls put in the link of where and when the events will be held. Thank you all. And if that's it, may I make a motion to adjourn the meeting tonight?
Second.
Thank you. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Have a great evening, everybody. Great presentation.
Great.
Thank you,
That's
Dr.
great.
Hampton. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night, Evelyn. I will end the meeting, and for all those that are left, it'll be it.
Thank you, Lenore. Great job. Thank you so much.
No problem. Have a great evening.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Let's everybody leave.